There was times when I did wanted to say, well, to hell with this. I went down into a very depressed mood, and you couldn't get cigarettes, and you couldn't get this, and you couldn't get that, and it was frustrating.
The longest and most frustrating 4 months of Leslie Palmer's life. She moved into this old age home a day before lockdown came into effect. Her 91-year-old mother fell ill and required frail care, necessitating this move. She also had to close down her craft shop indefinitely. A shock to her system after years of living in her own home.
Being solely locked up in what I would call a prison cell. Now I know what the inmates of a prison feel like. Because you don't have the freedom during that lockdown. You couldn't get anywhere. You could only go to the nearest shop.
Family visits are a highlight for the elderly living in old age homes. The lack of social interaction with loved ones pushed many into deep depression.
For an hour, we were allowed to take a walk around our floor. And you would see them go by your gate, morning, morning, and that was basically it. We couldn't have conversations because we had to keep at least 2 foot away from each other.
But her greatest therapy came from knitting these dolls. She even gave them names.
I miss all my friends from Walmer. I miss my customers from the shop. Actually, I even miss the shop going to work.
But the hardest thing for her was not being able to see her frail mother.
My mother would be here helping me sew these toys up. She wouldn't do so much the knitting, but she would help me stuff the toys up and sew them together. I haven't got her now. My mother's unable to do that, whereas if COVID-19 hadn't come, then we could do things like that together, because I would have been there to keep my mother's mind stimulated.
Despite the many challenges, Leslie says the move to the old age home was a lifeline. Now she takes it a day at a time, and every stitch brings her closer to her normal pre-coronavirus life. Lerato Fekisi, SABC News, Port Elizabeth.
And now my colleague Lerato Fekisi joins us now for more. Lerato, a very good evening to you. It sounds like a really heartbreaking story. I mean, it really pulled at the heartstrings, because if I think a lot of us try to imagine what it was, she really clearly articulated the anxiety and, you know, the mental health challenges that it wrought on.
Definitely, Tsepis. I think what you heard is just a true reflection of how tough it was for the elderly during this time. I remember when I actually came in, when I opened her door just yesterday when we did the interview, and the first thing she said is that, you know what, I'm so happy to see other people besides my neighbors. And she said, and I quote her saying that, you know what, Lerato, were it not for the Eco Foundation, who actually gave people like her a chance to knit beanies during this time, she said that should have gone really mad. Also, a tough part, Tsepis, was that, like you heard in the package, her mom, who is 91, is in a frail care center. She can't use the phone much. When she did try to talk to her through WhatsApp, she would reply with very small messages. And then she said last week, for the first time, she saw her mom for the first time in 5 months. And the first thing her mom said was like, oh my gosh, you're actually alive. I thought you had died. Meaning that during COVID, during the lockdown, when she was communicating with her mom, because her mom is not inclined with social media and how to use it, she didn't really understand that she was speaking to her daughter at that time. So even the social and also the online communication among elderly people at this time was tough, because they're not really inclined with using WhatsApp and video calls like we were. So that was also another barrier. But I think the tough part for Leslie is that, as you can see, although that she was very much depressed, she's such a bubbly person. I mean, she was saying, Lerato, I wish I could just give you a hug right now, because I'm such a hugger. So I can't hug people. I can't high five my neighbors. I have to walk around and just greet at a distance. So it's those small significant things for the elderly people that for us don't mean much, but for them, when you're in an old age home where anytime someone comes to visit you, it's like you're literally seeing a rainbow. It meant that much. So it was really a tough time for them, especially emotionally. She said that if you look at her room, it really is quite small, and to be cramped up in that space for 5 months and only allowed to walk for an hour in your complex, you are monitored when you go to a shop. You can't hug, you can't high five, you can't do the normal things that you could do in that restricted space. It was really, really tough for her, but she said she survived. And I asked her, were you ever afraid you get the virus? And she was like, no, Lerato, I trust God. So I knew I'll never get infected, but I was very much scared of getting depressed and eventually going mad.
And I want to talk about that depression and how she understood it before and how she understands it now, Lerato, because I think while we've been talking about social distancing, a lot of us have never really thought about how that leads to social isolation, and even more so when you've got an elderly, sick parent whom you depend on as your support system, but you also have to keep away in order to protect them from the virus. How has her perceptions changed? How has she processed all of this in her mind?
I think she really processed it by just trying to keep busy as much as possible. She said that there was a time where she would literally open the TV every single day and listen to the statistics, be very terrified, be very anxious, and then stay up for the better part of the night thinking, is my mom going to get infected? Who's the next person to be infected? Am I going to get the virus in any single way? So she said eventually she actually turned the radio off, turned the TV off, and I was like, I'm just going to focus on staying healthy. And I think what kept her going more than anything else is that she was knitting the whole time. She was sewing the whole time with the hope that one day people will buy her dolls and buy the scarf that she was making. So she understands depression as just being in a hole. She said that many times she stayed up at night until the early morning, but more of her concern was that how is she going to sustain herself? Because if you heard in the insert, she owned a craft shop and it closed because of the lockdown, and she can't open again because she can't afford it. So beyond just the virus, her most concern was post-coronavirus. How does she make a livelihood? How does she survive? And how does she keep herself going financially when the one source of income is now shut down? So she says the sleepless nights were caused by that, but in order to get out of that, she was like, let me get up and do something. And like you said, like you saw in the package, she started making dolls. And the funny part is that every single doll that you see in the package has a name. There's a Barney, there's a Fred, there's a Nandi. And even that was just a fun way of trying to make the little life that she now has in the small space fun and creative for herself, which I think definitely helped her.
Thank you very much, and thanks to you for doing the story as well. Always important to get a first-hand account of how South Africans are weathering the storm, this ahead of World Mental Health Day. The World Health Organization encouraging governments to create more funding and better access to mental health care packages. That was Lerato Fekisi.